Let's get started this morning. Thank you all for joining in. We've done this every year except last year. We have a Columbus Day event where we invite the public in. And the first thing we do is we go through Civics 101. We talk about how a bill becomes law in the state of Kansas. So that's how we'll start today. And that will be followed by, I'm going to give an update on what the Water Committee is doing. And then third, people have asked me about the Constitution, and you can go read the Constitution, do all that on your own, but I've been alarmed by the misuse of terms that are in the Constitution and as well as our state constitution. So I'll go through some of those terms that I've done some research on. So with that, let's get started. I'm going to share my screen. Can everybody hear me at this point? Okay, good. Can everybody see it? Okay. Here we go. This is a typical committee room here at the Capitol. And you'll see clear at the front behind where the flags are, that's where the chair of the committee sits. And in the center aisle are where the people that help us out during the session will be seated. And I will show you an actual drawing. Right up here in the center is where the chair sits, and to that person's right will be the ranking minority member. So the party that, in our instance here, the Republicans control the House, so that this would be the ranking Democrat that is assigned by the minority leader. Over here to my left then will be the vice chair. And then the members of the committee are seated around the outside. In the center, this first chair right here belongs to the committee assistant. This is the person that is responsible for taking the notes and preparing the meeting notes, and which are then first go to the chair for approval, and then they go to the committee for approval. The minutes of every meeting. Next to that person sits a person from research. So there's two research people here. They happen to be attorneys. And their job is, if any member of this committee asks a question about a law or a regulation, whatever, then we refer that to them and see if they can't find it while we're still sitting at the tables. And they are very good, nonpartisan, and they help the committee out a great deal. Now, during the summer months when we're out of session, they act as committee assistant at that point. Committee assistant only works during the session. On the other side, we have two chairs for revisers. These are the attorneys, nonpartisan attorneys that reside in the Capitol, and they are assigned to different committees. And they, if we have questions on the law, they will advise the committee that that is not in the law, it's in the law, whatever, but they are there to answer those questions. And they also will lean over to me sometimes and correct me and procedure, whatever, to make sure that every meeting is legal and done as it should be. The next chair belongs to the IT person. Now, they can sit there or over here, it doesn't matter. But the IT person, because of COVID, we now have ability to do what we're doing right now. So every committee meeting is now broadcast. And it's also retained as a YouTube. So you can get that committee meeting either way, going into the state system and find either the WebEx, or you can go to YouTube and you can find that meeting as well. From all over the state, the COVID pushed this and we finally got it done. But now you can view every meeting that takes place at the Capitol. And so the public does not have to be at the Capitol. And if the chair chooses, they can ask questions. That's rare, but it can happen. Down here, this table right here is where the person comes in to testify. They stand behind that little desk and they will give their testimony. And at that, when we're doing a hearing, and they are open to questions then after that from anybody on the committee. And this is where the grilling starts sometimes. It can get very interesting depending on the topic. And back here, obviously, is where all the seating goes for those that wish to be there and watch the meeting. Now, there are rules. There are rules for everything. In the case of a committee, these are the rules that I have drawn up for my committee. I'm in charge of that committee, and so I'm also responsible for the rules for that committee. And there's a bunch of them there. You don't need to look through all these, but the most important one is the one down here, number 26. For any dispute or uncertainty, the chairman's ruling shall be final. That's important. If people get unruly or they start questioning everything, then I can cut them off at any point. And my ruling is final at that point. And adjournment is up to me, to the chair, whoever that may be. Now, how a bill becomes law. The bill is introduced. A bill can be written by anybody in the state and bring it to us for consideration. Now, I will tell you that the chances of that being accepted and run through the system are pretty slim. What happens normally, let's say Richard comes to me and says, I have an idea for a bill. And we talk about it, and I say, okay. And then I take Richard down to the revisor's office. And that revisor, myself, and Richard then will sit and go through what that bill should look like. And they will write the bill in the language that's acceptable to all the attorneys that run around up there. Once that bill is written, you go back to the committee, and any member can bring a bill before the committee. So they holler at the chair. They say, Mr. Chairman, I have a bill for introduction. And the chair will recognize them, and they'll say, and at this point, it only has a revisor's number. It has an R- something or other number on it. And it's a bill to be introduced. And so that person will describe the bill. They will give the revisor's number, and then they will say, who originated this bill? In our example so far, I would say I am on behalf of Richard Michael. And that goes into the official record at that point. And so if it's real testy, sometimes we'll vote whether or not that bill should be introduced. Normally, out of courtesy, doesn't matter which party, if a member of the committee brings a bill in, it's customary we accept that bill. It's a matter of courtesy, respect for the other representatives on the committee. Now, the next step then is that bill will go to the chief clerk. The chief clerk will assign a number to that bill. So now the bill has an official number. And that number is the one that will be used throughout the life of that bill. As a side note, every bill has a 2-year life. If it has not made it through the system in 2 years, it dies. Now, we have a saying around here, nothing ever dies at the Capitol. And there's a lot of truth to that because the revisors keep everything. So you go back in 2 years from now and Richard says, I'd really like to see that bill go in again if it didn't make it through. So we re-enter it again, go through that process. So now it goes to the speaker. After the number is affixed to it by the chief clerk, the bill goes to the speaker's office, and the speaker says, okay, that bill should go to whatever committee he decides it goes to. In this case, let's say it goes back to my committee. It's assigned to me. So then we, in the committee, the chair will set up a date for a hearing. And the hearing is published a week in advance. The chair has to have his calendar a week in advance so all the public can see what's coming up. So I have that bill on the calendar. And anybody that wishes to speak on that bill will notify the committee assistant. And there's rules for that. So most important thing is they have to have it in at least 24 hours before the committee. And up to 72 if it's a weekend. Anyway, you send your testimony in. All testimonies have to be in writing. And so that's submitted. And then let's say on Wednesday, we have the hearing. And Richard has submitted his testimony. He comes in and he stands at the podium. He's recognized to come forward. And he stands. And the one thing that we kind of cringe is when people come in and read their testimony, because the committee members will have seen those documents a day ahead of time so they can prepare for the meeting. They're interested in the meat and potatoes in that bill, so to speak. And then at that point, when you have finished, the chair will say, are there any questions? And the members one at a time are recognized to ask you questions. And now within the rules that I showed you, I have a rule that everybody will be treated with respect. And I can cut them off if I see that they are not treating our guest, the testifier, then I will cut them off. I've only had to do that a couple of times, but it can happen. But it's one of our rules. And as a side note, Robert's rules is used for, generally speaking, for groups under 50. Our house is made up of 125. So we have a different set of rules, and it's called the Mason's Manual. And it's used by larger groups such as our House Legislature and also in the U.S. Congress. So the Masons rule will apply. If my rules don't cover it, then Masons does. And in one of my rules, I refer to Masons for decorum and so forth. Okay, now we've had our hearing. We have to wait at least 24 hours, generally speaking. We can break that rule with a vote, but generally speaking, you let that lie for 24 hours. And so we're coming back on Thursday. And I have announced, normally it'll be the next week, quite frankly, but let's say for this example, it's the next day. I have announced that we will be working that bill. And that's Richard's bill that we're working on that day. And this is the point where the audience and no one outside the committee will be involved in this process. The chairman will say, what is the will of the committee on House Bill 22? And one of the members would, whatever, will say, I recommend we pass this bill out favorably. And that's when the debate begins. And so members on the committee will debate back and forth, the pros, the cons, whatever, on the bill. And at some point, normally the chair can tell when we're kind of exhausted the debate. And at some point, some of them just want to argue among themselves over and over again, saying the same things. And I will say that's enough. I think we've reached a point where we can decide whether this bill moves forward or not. And so we'll call for a vote. Now, normally that vote is a voice vote. All in favor say aye, all opposed no. And by hearing, I'll say, okay, this bill will be passed out favorably. Now, someone could say, I want this bill referred out of our committee with no comment. And that's kind of like a death knell for that bill. So you're not recommending it at that point. And that's never a good thing, but it happens. It happens. Or they can defeat the bill at that point. If that happens in committee, that bill is dead. We'll go no further. But for this example, it passed out of committee. Now we go to the House floor. And this is where we are now with this bill. 125 members. Every day, the House meets at 11 a.m. We go in, and the first thing we do is the chaplain will give a prayer. She stands there. In our case, it's a she, and gives the prayer. After that, a House member is assigned to lead the Pledge of Allegiance. And they will stand either here on this side or this side. And in a loud voice, they'll say aye, and all the chamber will chime in and we'll say the Pledge of Allegiance. The Speaker of the House sits up here, and he'll call the meeting to order. Right here is the Majority Leader sits, the Speaker's chair on the floor, and then pro tem. My chair is this one right here. And unfortunately, I have to act like I'm paying attention all the time because of where I'm seated. The guys way back here, they can do homework, whatever they want to do, but I can't. So the Majority Leader will go to the podium here, and he will say, we want to have the Committee of the Whole. We want to dissolve the House and move into the Committee of the Whole. And the Speaker will say, all those in favor, aye, no. And at that point, the Speaker has normally prearranged for somebody in the House to replace him in that chair. And so then at that point, that person goes up to the chair, calls the meeting to order, and now it becomes a huge committee at that point. And so Richard's bill is up that day. And so myself or whoever brought the bill will go down front and explain the bill, give the merits, whatever, the arguments for passage of that bill. At that point, there will be others who will be lighting up the screen. These screens there's one there and one over here. And that is where everybody's name appears. And if you want to speak, you push your button, the blue button that says bill. You want to speak to the bill. So on his screen up here, he will see what order they were pushed, and he will start calling out names. They will go down here, and they will speak either for it or against it. Or if they have questions, they'll call back. Whenever your person is here, the person that was there previously has to stand back over here on this side or this side. They cannot be anywhere near the podium when they're speaking, unless this person comes up and says, I want to speak to the carrier of the bill. So that person comes over here, and the two of them are standing here. And they'll start firing questions. And this person, they've done their homework, they're ready. So they'll answer all the questions. And then this person will say, that's enough. You've answered all my questions. And that person will leave. And that person will finish their presentation, whatever they want to say. At this stage, this can go on for hours. And at some point, this person that carried it will go back to the podium and say, Mr. Chairman or Madam Chair, I move that this bill be passed. And at that point, a voice vote is taken. Now, a person in the audience can ask for a recorded vote. At that point, then everybody is required to push their button on their desk to vote up or down on that bill. So let's say it's passed. We're almost there. The next step is, and this is a requirement, that has to sit for 24 hours. We can come back the next day and have final action. That's when the bill is finally passed out of the House or the Senate. The speaker's in the chair, and he'll say final action on House Bill 22. At that point, this is no longer a voice vote. This is a recorded vote. This is the one in law that has to be recorded, and everybody's vote is known to the public. In the committee, I can ask if anybody wishes to have their vote recorded, and they can voluntarily have their votes recorded, and that does happen. When it's a sensitive bill, some people feel, I want my vote recorded so I can tell my constituents I voted either for or against that bill. So that bill's done at that point. And of course, there's rules. We have the rules of the House of Representatives. These are rules beyond what's in the Mason's Manual. And each one of us have a copy of this at our desk. And this covers all the nitty-gritty stuff about how you conduct yourself, and can you have food at your table, all that kind of stuff. Everything's in there. And if it's not in here, then we refer to Mason's Manual at that point. So when that happens, that bill is carried over to the Senate, to the other chamber. They go through the same process we did. Now it goes over to the Senate. And the Senate, the president of the Senate, will assign that bill to a committee. And they go through the exact same process as the House did. And that bill could die at any point. The bill to become law has to pass both chambers. So let's say they went through the whole process and they did a final action and it passed. Or they decided, and this is very common, the Senate doesn't like what we do and we do the same to them. We may change one word in the bill and say we don't like it the way it's written, or they can add all kinds of amendments to it. They can do whatever they want. At that point, they will send that bill back with their changes, and we have to go over it. And we have to go through the process all over again, not through the committee, but on the House floor. And our decision then is to either concur with their changes, or we say we non-concur. At that point, it goes to conference committee. Conference committee is made up of 3 members from the House and 3 members from the Senate. Normally, those 3 members are the chair of the committee that it came out of, the vice chair, and the ranking minority person. So those 3 people, and depending if it's Senate bill or House bill, but let's say we go into the conference committee. You sit across the table in one of these conference rooms, in that middle section, you sit across from them, and if it's a House bill, the chair is in charge of the meeting. If it's Senate, they are. And at that point, say, what's the will? And say, what's your problem with this? You know, the senator will say, you changed this. Why did you change that? We say, well, what you wrote stinks. It's terrible. We don't like it. Your job on that committee is to represent the House position. Their job is to represent the Senate position on that bill. So you will argue back and forth. No, let's not call it argue. Let's say we discuss it passionately. And these are open to the public as well. And you come to a point where you say, well, we can't decide this today. Let's schedule another meeting. And these meetings can go on for days, sometimes weeks. Normally, you can normally resolve your differences in 2 or 3 days. And when you're sitting there and they say, well, we want this in the bill. And at that point, I'll say, well, we wish to be excused for a few minutes. We'll go outside the room, the 3 of us on the House side, and we'll discuss what they said. And I've been known to call an expert to come out with us. And we'll ask him, what does this do in the law, whatever. And then we'll go back and we'll say that is totally unacceptable, or we accept that. So it's a back and forth, a little bit of trading action going on. So let's say we came up with the conference committee, we came to an agreement. Then it goes back to both the House and the Senate for another vote. The final vote, let's say it's yes on both sides to the conference committee report. Now that bill is ready to move on. We have rules for the joint committees. And this is how we're supposed to act when we're mixing it up with our counterparts across the rotunda. And we normally follow the rules. Some don't, but most do. Now the bill goes to the governor. The governor can either sign that bill, or she can not sign it and it will become law in 10 days. Or she can veto the bill. This is where it gets a little dicey, because once the governor has vetoed a bill, it has to go back to the legislature. And just a side note, this is why the legislature breaks in April. We take 2.5, 3 weeks off, and that gives all the attorneys down below a chance to write the bill as it's finished with all the amendments and everything, put it in the correct language and get it ready. Goes to the governor, and then at that point it comes back. She vetoes it. It comes back to the legislature, both the House and the Senate. Get the same bill. And if it's a House bill, we have to vote first. If it's a Senate bill, they vote first on the override. And it takes 2/3 vote to override the governor's veto. In the Senate, that's 27 votes. In the House, that's 84. If the veto stands, that's the end of it. That bill dies. If we override, both chambers override, then that bill becomes law. And they are sent off to the Secretary of State's where they're entered into the legal system and all of that. So let's stop right there for a moment. So do we have any questions at this point on how a bill becomes law?
I have a question.
I have a question.
Yes, Vi.
Oh,
Vi is
do I
first,
go
then
first?
Richard.
Okay. At the point that I think that the committee would vote it, no, on the floor, it would vote it out. Then there is a 24-hour waiting period before the final action vote. What's the purpose of that?
It's a technical, it gives the staff time to prepare that bill for a vote, but it also is put in there so that the legislators have time to read that bill in total and get prepared for the final vote. Sometimes it happens, now we get towards the end of the session. This is where that rule comes in primarily, because they'll be in a hurry and they'll say, we got to do this right away. And then we'll say, well, there's the 24-hour rule. Let's not rush this. So, but it's primarily for the administrative to give them time to get it ready. But it also is a cooling off period, so to speak. Richard.
Yeah, what is a reasonable strategy for trying to get a bill through? Because it sounds like you really should have a lot of support before you even start writing the bill.
You're correct. If you want the bill passed in the legislature, you have a lot of work to get done. You are going to visit with the members of the committee first. That's the first step. So you're going to get as much support as you can on that bill. So let's say I am the one representing you on that bill. I will be talking to the committee members and saying, look, we really need this bill and here are the reasons why. And you'll know ahead of time whether you've got the votes or not. If you don't have the votes, it will probably never come up in the committee even. But so it gets a little dicey in the committees in that that's where the actual work begins. You want a bill to go before the House and you want a favorable recommendation out of the committee, that's where your work is placed. Does that answer your question?
Well, it sounds like you almost have to do a lot of work ahead of time, even before you propose that. I mean, actually propose the bill to the committee, the revisers. It seems you've got to kind of be deciding whether you have support in general. And I'll give you an example.
Well, not necessarily. You can go ahead and get with the revisers and have the bill drafted, have it entered into the committee. But let's say one of the committee members come to me, they've got your bill and they say, okay, I need some time before you have a hearing on this bill. Let me work with the committee before I ask you to bring it up for a hearing. So that gives your proponent on the committee time to visit with the committee members and all of that. And if you're involved, then you have some time to visit with some of the folks also. And then at that point, the committee member will come to the chair and say, we're ready to have our hearing.
Okay, don't you
We
have
work
to?
together on this, so I'm good.
Yeah.
Go ahead.
Well, somebody has to introduce the bill for you, like either yourself or someone else. So obviously that person should be supporting what you want to do. Is that correct?
Absolutely. Yeah. And that person then is the one who will be your
So being
advocate.
representative, excuse me, you're breaking
Say
up
that
on me
again.
because my system's breaking up a little bit, but
Yeah.
it doesn't have to necessarily be your representative, because you have to find a representative that actually supports your position, correct?
Right. Right. It does not have to be your representative.
Okay.
You just have to find somebody that supports it and is willing to go through this process with you.
Okay.
Doesn't matter.
Now, do all bills like this start in the House, or could they also start in the Senate?
They can start either place.
Okay.
And if it starts in the Senate, it'll have a Senate bill number on it. Now, in special cases, there are times when, like Senator Longbine and I put identical bills in both chambers. And Alma wanted to buy the other half of that lake. The state owned half of their lake that they use for water. So we both put in the same bill, identical bills. A couple changes made, but we got it through the process. And when it got to the other chamber, they said, well, this is the same bill we have. We'll just pass the Senate bill or we'll just pass the House bill, whichever one. But it went through both chambers at the same time. That's kind of rare, but it does happen. If you feel it's real important, you get your senator to help you out, and they normally will.
Okay. Well, thank you very much. That was good.
Okay, everybody, any more questions?